r/AskReddti. People who ran into the weird kid from school years later. How did he or she turn out? We had a kid that would do weird shit in front of other kids for attention. Climb into bins, eat old food out of the bins, let people throw yogurt over him, dive into bushes, that sort of thing. Otherwise he seemed mostly harmless. Ended up in prison for pouring a kettle of boiling water over a guy and a girl who he fancied. They were at a house party. He saw her talking to a guy, so he went to the kitchen, boiled the kettle, then calmly walked up to them and poured it over their heads. I'm not sure he had ever even spoken to her, but he was seemingly jealous that she was talking to another guy. Then after he was released from prison for that, he took his mother's car on a joyride with two of his mates, crashed into a car driven by an elderly couple, then ran off, leaving his two mates dead and the elderly couple badly injured. I think he's still in prison for that. Not quite as bad, but we had another weird kid who would talk to no one and would spend all day drawing graffiti in a sketchbook, which he guarded with his life. Not good graffiti, he just kept drawing his tag in different fonts. I think it was aspect or some other badly spelt word. If he spoke, it was usually just to tell people how great he thought Banksy was. He ended up spraying this tag all over our small and otherwise graffiti-free English town and was immediately arrested after his old teachers recognized it. I think the sketchbook was used as evidence. He was then arrested a second time for spraying his tag on the side of the courthouse in front of half a dozen CCTV cameras. I bumped into him a year or so back, and he now works for a charity which runs a kids club in the next town over. He teaches kids how to skate and BMX, as well as running street art classes where they legally decorate the skate park with graffiti. There was a weird kid in my middle school who would eat hand sanitizer, cut his fingers, and write 666 on the classroom walls with his blood and other creepy things. Apparently, he had a crush on me and asked me to the 8th grade prom, but I declined. Fast forward to the last day of middle school, I receive a message from him on Facebook saying he had a huge crush on me and that he would kill himself if I didn't feel the same. I told him that despite what he had just sent me, I wasn't interested. A few months later we start high school, but since there's 4 high schools in my area, a lot of us were scattered around, and we ended up going to different schools. I never saw him again, but through Facebook I saw that he started a relationship with a girl that also attended our middle school. He looked really happy, and honestly I was happy for him. He seemed to have grown out of that weird middle school stage and genuinely seemed like a great guy. Around 2 years later, I was a junior in HS. I go to a local supermarket and just mind my business. The next day I receive a message from him on Facebook saying he was working at the supermarket and happened to see me. I messaged him back and apologized for not seeing him and saying hi. He then proceeded to apologize for all the weird middle school stuff and that message he had sent me on the last day of 8th grade. I told him all was fine and we left it at that. Now, by the looks of Facebook, he's a workout fanatic and his body has changed a lot. He also seems to be going to college and spends a lot of time with his family. I'm glad he's doing fine. I was the weird kid. Mum was never really around. No father figure. We lived in a half-renovated house with animal feces through it because my mum kept her dogs indoors 24/7. We were also extremely broke. Like, mum would go hungry to feed my sister and my mother, on reflection, was mentally unwell due to the depression of losing her mum 2 years prior. She still hasn't recovered to this day. I realized years later my clothes probably smelt like animal feces all the time. I had very few friends in high school. I ended up getting into drugs at 13 to escape from my shit life, plus I had no boundaries or restrictions from any parental figures. I also lived on my PlayStation and Gamma Boy due to not having any friends to actually spend time with, making me socially inept. Both my sister and I were eventually uplifted by welfare services and I ended up in a boys' home for 3 years, where I finally got the boundaries and basic care I needed. I had a great social worker who worked hard to set me up with a positive future despite my circumstances. I slowly gained social skills and realized I could have a normal life. After leaving school, I realized I had a strong work ethic that led me to work up to holding management positions in basically every business I've worked in since my early 20s. It also got me through university doing a Bachelor of Social Work. Now I'm a social worker supporting young adults to change the direction of their lives and to have a life they can be proud of. I've just been promoted to manage the service I work for and to grow the service so it can be extended to other districts. I guess I've done all right for myself when I look at where I've come from. Edit. I'm also happily married with 3 amazing kids, whom I make my life mission to have a better upbringing than the one I experienced. Edit. Quite the response. Thanks for everyone who left positive comments. I'm glad I could share this with you. For those who are asking about mum and my sister became a semi-pro athlete and also graduated uni. She's in a long-term relationship and has a job that enables her to train for her sporting discipline. Mum is doing okay. She's still not mentally there, but she is better than she was, and she does try most days. She loves the grandkids and spoils them every time she sees them. She's got a job now and has held it down for a few months. Her decision making is still poor sometimes, but my sister and I keep an eye on her and challenge her decisions when they are not helpful to her quality of life. Pretty sure I was the weird kid, but runner-up was a very nice but shy girl who immigrated from China and loved computers, but was incredibly meek. A conversation was like prying teeth, would only make strange noises in class, etc. And frankly, in hindsight, what little she said at the time makes me realize now she was in an emotionally abusive household. Example, she had some small role in a school play in middle school. I was happy for her when I saw that her mom came, as she said she doubted her mom would come. I asked afterwards, and she said her mom said she looked like a sack of dog bones on the stage during her part. I legit did not know what to say when she said stuff like that, because I was a kid myself. Fortunately, I can say I know how she turned out, and it's a happy ending. We went to the same college, and she was originally signed up for pre-med, because even though this gal was a computer whiz, her mom insisted she had to be a doctor. Within a year though, she rebelled against everything and became a computer science major, the horror, and became an own source of advice for other kids of Asian descent, in particular seeking to stand up to their parents' expectations. She's now a test engineer working for a household name computing company and posts pictures of international travel and various cheeky hobbies. So I guess she was great once she could find herself, and most of the weirdness was imposed upon her. Edit. People are asking how I was weird. Unfortunately, while astronomy is a cool thing to be into as an adult, it is not when you are at an all-girls high school. This was combined with how honestly I didn't know how to interact with a lot of the other kids. I wasn't shy, but had real trouble making friends. Was very ostracized in elementary school too, like kid who sat alone at lunch for years and didn't figure it out until college. There was a girl at my school who I will call Melanie. Melanie was easily the most socially awkward / unaware girl I've ever met. Like, masturbating at school awkward, picking her nose and eating it publicly awkward. By the end of high school, she had figured out how to not do these insane things that made people stare and laugh at her, but needless to say, she had a rough go. But she was also one of those people who was a really nice, genuine person. I moved away after college and didn't have FB until at least 10 years after graduation, so I had no idea what most of my classmates were doing. Maybe 5 years ago, I spotted her and friended her. She ended up marrying this guy who went to our school and was maybe 3 years older than us. I knew him from work and he asked me out at one point. He was also really nice, but super nerdy and socially awkward. I didn't think about it at the time, but when I saw she married him, I was like, oh my god, they're perfect for each other. They moved to a state that has a bunch of mountains and they don't have any children, so they are always posting all these amazing hiking and rock climbing adventures they're doing together. They go to all kinds of festivals together. Renaissance, I think, Star Trek, horror, etc. They look super happy, and I talked to her grandma last year. who told me they're happy as clams. I'm just so happy for her. So there was this kid that I'm pretty sure had some sort of mental disorder in my school for the first half of 10th grade, and he hung out with a couple people in my friend group, so we talked sometimes, but he eventually got kicked out cause his grades were absolutely horrible. Fast forward about a year, and I'm at a party my sister, a year older, threw at our house, and apparently someone thought it'd be funny to invite him, and I'm sorta keeping an eye on the guy, cause he keeps saying he really wants to fuck someone at the party and is generally acting weird and desperate. A few hours pass, and he's sitting on the couch talking to one of my sister's friends, and he does something I'm too distracted to catch that makes her get up and leave, which he responds to by getting up and grabbing onto her wrists and refusing to let go as she tried to pull away. So I stepped between him and the girl and told him if she wants to leave, that's that, and after she did, he just smiled proudly and bragged to me about how he kissed her neck. I promptly asked him to leave and told my friend not to invite him to anything at my house again, and I haven't seen him since. Let me introduce to Josh. Josh was a strange boy in both looks and demeanor. Clearly he was from a poor background, which stood out in school because the overall demographic of the school was upper middle class. So Josh shows up on the first day, slightly grubby looking, barely able to write his own name at 11 years old, and looking like he wanted to punch a wall. He quickly made a name for himself, acting up in class, being tardy, and generally being a bit of a nuisance. He'd disrupt lessons, he'd lash out at other students, and he had a clear anger problem. Josh became an easy target for bullies because he would react to their bullying, usually by throwing a chair. It's fair to say Josh had little to no friends. We were a tutor group of about 27 to 30, depending on people coming and going. Not a particularly tight-knit, but we had bonded over a couple of things. A girl who'd had a brush with death was in our tutor. One of our tutors left part way through the year. By year 9 we, for the most part, began to tolerate Josh. Josh as a result became more trusting and calmed down. He still had hell of a temper, and he still was an easy target, but he began to try and socialize a bit more. One day it was a rainy lunchtime, and he came and sat with a group of us, all from the same tutor group. We asked him how he was, and he disclosed to us that his mum's new boyfriend had been showing him gay porn. We, of course, being 13 to 14, didn't really know what to say or how to react, but there was a resounding consensus that that was not normal. He'd hinted at a very unhappy home life before. In hindsight, I don't know why any of the teachers didn't pick up on it when things he had mentioned were such a safeguarding risk. The more and more Josh disclosed more of how miserable his home life was, how abused he was, the more respect we had for him. He didn't know anything other than violence. He had never been shown love or respect. He had never been given the opportunity to better himself. Over time we became very protective of Josh. The cool boys in our tutor group would step into fights to defend him. We'd all keep an eye out for him when he was walking home, etc. I saw Josh about a year ago. I caught a glimpse of him in the street and shouted his name. He came running over and gave me the biggest bear hug ever. He told me he'd been working really hard on himself and that he was hoping to get a job in the local comic book shop where he spends hours and hours reading. He seemed genuinely happy and like he'd escaped his abusive background. Honestly, I wish him the absolute best, and I hope he finds both happiness and stability. So she wasn't weird, but everyone thought she was, and it made me so mad. So I'm from country woods of Alabama, and we had a foreign student from China. I talked to her, and out of the discussions turned into political debates about communism vs capitalism, which were never hostile between us. It was actually really informative on both sides. A lot of people listened to these debates because they happened during dead time in class and no one had anything better to do, but people saw her as weird for her views and mocked her, both behind her back and to her face. They made her start crying, and she went to the bathroom to hide her embarrassment, and I had enough. I don't remember what I said or did. I don't remember leaving the room. I just remember being halfway across the school, steaming mad that we had 20 plus other students in the room and no one could see what was wrong with harassing a girl until she cried and had to leave. No one ever said anything about her again, at least where I could hear again. The teacher called me in later that day and apologized that I had to step in because she didn't. A lot of kids got Saturday school for harassment. Anyways, St. George Madden studying to be a doctor last I heard. Her parents almost disowned her because she didn't make Harvard. I was the weird kid. I joined the army right out of high school before being discharged due to a failed PT test at the end of 8. I avoided everyone from high school, which was easier since I was never on social media, and eventually found a factory job before my bank account was completely empty. I was fired a month later due to being rather bad at the job and not fitting in too well. I've yet to find another job so far and my savings are slowly but surely running out. I'm leaving for college in the fall due to some scholarships I received, but only time will tell how that turns out. So, not too bad all things considered. I'm still breathing, and I'm not homeless, which is more than some people can say. I'm still socially awkward. I've just stopped talking to most people in my life in an attempt to save face. Better to have people think you're stupid than to open your mouth and prove them right, I suppose. It also has the added benefit of not having to explain to most of my family why I'm not a soldier anymore. In 2004, I had a computers class with James Holmes, guy who shot up the theater in Colorado, my junior year of high school. He was a sophomore at the time. I never really talked to him much, but he hung out with a group of kids that were near where my group would hang out during lunch. He was a face that I would recognize walking through the halls. At the time, we had a number of mutual friends. One of my good friends is also named James and had been given the nickname Doggy by Holmes to avoid confusion. They were on the same soccer team. Every once in a while at lunch our groups would merge. There was one day where our groups had merged and everyone, except for one person from his group and myself, were still at our spot. I'm not 100% sure it was him, but it very well could have been. Whether this was him or not, while everyone else was gone, something happened where he started to talk about shooting up the school because people were so superficial and fake. I did not take him seriously, but I still recognized how dangerous and odd of a comment it was. As a result, I remember saying something like, "You might be right about people being superficial, but you're better than that. If you did that, then you wouldn't be any better than them. Wouldn't it be better to prove them wrong with your own success?" He then responded by saying something like, "Well, you guys are cool, so don't worry about that. But yeah, I guess you are right." After that, I never really saw him much or interfaced with that group much either. Oddly enough, he ended up also going to the same college I attended, UC Riverside. I had no idea that he had even attended UC Riverside until after the school shooting in Colorado. Super late to this thread, but I thought I'd add my story anyways. Way back in elementary school I sat next to this kid, Austin. He wasn't too strange most of the time, but he certainly had his quirks. Any second of free time he had was spent drawing control panels of airplanes on pieces of paper and then miming the motions of a pilot, accompanied by airplane noises with his mouth, and of course communicating with air traffic control. Games of kickball during recess came to a halt when Austin saw a plane flying across the sky. He'd point up to it and inform everyone of the model number and any other info about the plane in question. He was a small airplane savant, but it quickly got old with the rest of the class. He would be teased about his love of airplanes. Kids would laugh as he sat at his desk in the corner and made the whoosh sounds of his imaginary plane taking off of the runways. They'd ball up his drawings and toss them in the trash when he wasn't looking. They'd tease about how proud he was of his new airplane t-shirt. You know how mean kids can be, but Austin never relented. He did the same things he always did until he moved away. It might have been 5th grade when he moved away and we never saw him again. I wasn't great friends with him, but he was enough of a character to leave an impression and I never forgot about him. Fast forward 20 years or so, I get that bug to search for old names on Facebook and his name pops into my head. After some quick searching I find a profile picture that is most definitely him. Has wearing aviator sunglasses with a headset and microphone and the biggest smile you've ever seen. I click on the picture and sure enough, it's him. And sure enough, he's actually a pilot. I got the biggest goofiest grin across my face when I realized that this weird kid that everyone teased became the guy that grew up and lived out his dream. He flies planes for a living and does what he pretended to do at his desk every day. I don't think I've ever been more happy for someone else than I was for him. We reconnected in college over a decade ago through email at first, then started going to live concerts together. We are still sort of friends today, though I and several friends of mine have questioned this decision over the years. He is still weird AF. In grade school, he was the kid who talked funny, smelled bad, read the dictionary for fun, was no good at sports or friends, but generally perceived to be smart. He disappeared after 6th grade and the joke was that he invented time travel and was actually that guy from those commercials who wore the wacky question mark suit and talked about making money through federal grants or some shit. Turns out he didn't really go anywhere, just to a different middle/high school than most of us. He reached out to me in a weird way and claimed I was the only person from our childhood he was interested in talking to. I was also a bit of a loner for being the smarty pants girl who sucked at sports and had few friends. As an adult, he is constantly doing social activities, but also claims to hate most things and people, and is a habitual liar. As a result, I still don't really know what his story is, but my guess is he is on the spectrum, but has never been diagnosed because his parents were super neglectful. He works a corporate job, spends most of his money on concerts, does not drink, writes weird novels, I've read one, and is probably a bigger misogynist than he lets on to me, and he's pretty bad even then. We have clashed several times over his sexist views, they can get a little red pill why, and the awkward question of whether he likes me. I have been very clear that we are friends from the start. An incident last summer made me stop talking to him for 7 months, but we are sort of hanging out again, just more sparingly. I'm the weird kid 32 years old now, married and we have a dog and a cat. Marriage is perfect, my new job is perfect. I have love in my life, and I'm fairly healthy. I've experimented with psychedelics and partied hard in my younger years. I've made experiences that I will always cherish. I do, however, suffer from depression, which was the result of my being the weird kid and struggling in my own way to fit in with other kids. I used to think that if I did what they did and liked what they liked, that I would be accepted by them. I molded and remolded myself so many times to fit the description of what I thought my friends would accept that I never actually focused on myself in my developing years. I never gave myself a chance to find who I really am and what I really like. I often mentally kick myself for going through my teenage and college years the way that I did. I tend to convince myself that if I hadn't been the weird kid that tried to fit in, then maybe I would know who I'm by now, at least know what kind of career I prefer to retire in. My depression comes and goes nowadays. Mostly it goes. I owe that to my wife and my dog. They get me through the hardest days. I'm not looking for any consolation. Just thought I'd share, since you asked how I was doing. Thanks. Have an awesome day, Reddit. Discovered the weird kid and I ran in the same circle of friends post-university. Growing up he had been held back into my grade. He tended to hyper-focus on anything but schoolwork. Super smart, just didn't use it for what he needed to. He would randomly interrupt you during schoolwork with a random fact about telephones. He had a great job working with the city and a side job flipping houses with his brother. They do great work together. He is definitely more self-aware as an adult. He admits he probably has some form of autism, but was never diagnosed. At this point he doesn't see a reason to verify it. He is functioning really well, and well, he isn't one of my best friends. I definitely consider him a friend, and it's always nice catching up when we run into each other. We laugh about the time in middle school when I tricked him into climbing into a locker because I had gotten shoved into one earlier that week and he was an easy target at the time. Glad he forgave me. He is a pretty awesome guy. We had a guy at my high school who had what I'd consider a significant mental impairment and was part of our special ed unit. Every single morning tea and lunchtime, you'd see this guy miming the actions of using a whippersnipper and a lawnmower and would mow the grass where there wasn't any grass. I mean the basketball courts, car parks, pathways, literally everywhere there wasn't any actual grass. He'd pull the cord and start his invisible mower, fill up the fuel every 10 minutes or so, change the cord on the snipper, empty the catcher when it was full, the whole works. And he'd do this every day, every morning tea and lunch break, rain hail or shine, for 2 whole years before he graduated, but everyone said he'd done it since his first day of high school. 8 years later, and I randomly run into him. I'm at a house when this dude pulls up and 2 guys jump out and it's this guy with his boss and he starts fueling up an actual lawnmower and whippersnip and gets to work. His boss said he'd never been late, had never called in sick, never slacked off, just the perfect employee. Everyone thought this motherfucker was crazy mowing the bitumen in high school, but he was truly living his dream as an adult. A humble dream, yeah, but I bet he's happier every day than most people get to feel in a lifetime. Used to walk home from school clicking and saying capring while his head would turn like a typewriter. He was shot in the head when he was 6. As far as I remember, he was a bit strange before and after, but afterwards his boundaries dipped wildly and he would be found in strange houses he had no business being in, on strangers' beds, etc. He got along okay, being a little strange, a bit volatile, worryingly easily led, and eager to please. No history of violence. However, due to the circumstances of his shooting, he had a trust with 5 figures of compensation in it, and once he reached adulthood he had fallen in with a bad crowd. He and his friends drained his fund on heroin and alcohol, and then when he ran out of money started breaking into houses. In one house they assaulted and tortured a 90-year-old woman. He was the only one found guilty, and it's not really that big a stretch for me to make that he would never arrived at such a crime on his own. He didn't have the brain cells and his main motivations around other people was to please. I don't doubt he was involved whatsoever, but that boy was basically a point and shoot, and it really rubs me up the wrong way that the people behind him got away with what they probably made him do. Thank you so much for watching the whole video. Please leave a like and subscribe.